Thanks very much, Kevin. Good to be back doing another one of these. They work really well for us, and I'm glad to hear from all reports that they appear to be passing some information to you guys and working okay for you all as well. We'll try to go through this slide deck quite quickly so that we can leave some time for questions and try to get to some of your burning issues that you may want to ask as well. Today, just wanted to get into the Graduation Numeracy Assessment reports and what those are looking like and what they entail, and hopefully that's some new information for you at that level. I'm going to do a quick overview, talk about the reports, the student reports, the school reports, some things around next steps, and then, as I say, get to those Q&As at the end. Who are we? I'm Marcus Baer, Director of Graduation Assessment, so anything you want to ask about any of the literacy upcoming, the numeracy, the old language arts 12, etc., that's in my world, and I'll let Linda and Janine introduce themselves quickly before we move on.
Good morning, my name is Linda Dunn and I am the Acting Director of Operations currently, but my previous role is to manage the systems including TRACS and STS, which is a student transcript service, and that's essentially everything to do with transcripts, diplomas, historical data for grades 10 to 12.
And hi, I'm Janine Hannes, and I'm the Manager of Exam Administration and Marking. So any questions you have about administering the exams, markers, marking, all of that good stuff, that will be my area. So feel free to ask questions on that.
Thanks, Linda and Janine. Moving right along, a little overview. We've talked before around the purpose of the Graduation Numeracy Assessment, and again, I underscore that the word application, apply, is here throughout. It really is around having students understand and apply their knowledge and deeper learning and their mathematical reasoning they've learned across subject areas, and of course, these serve as graduation requirements. They provide system data and a host of other things that the numeracy assessment offers. I won't belabor this point, but we get into these discussions around, is the graduation numeracy assessment a formative measure or a summative measure? And really, it's not defined that way. It can be used in both senses of the term, and I've listed a couple of points around how it may be used formatively to support individual students, providing that feedback and information on a proficiency scale so they can set their learning goals. Additional information for educators, allowing you to take a look and identify areas of strength and weakness. And we'll talk about that today through the student reports and the school level reports. And of course, these measures do serve a summative function as well, providing system level information, students with evidence of how well they're doing in numeracy in their graduation years, and so forth. Hopefully also being used to help inform decision making at all levels of the education system. You have a standardized measure that gives you information across the board in how students are performing in numeracy. And again, we'll get more into that when we look at the school and student level reports. There are a number of questions that come up as we sort of tour around and talk to folks, and we've got a few of them down here I wanted to address very quickly. So who's required to write the graduation numeracy assessment? It's a province-wide assessment for all students, and it gets written by every kid graduating after June 2018. So that's pretty much everybody. What's the difference between numeracy and math? And really just want to make that point that this isn't a math assessment. It's about, again, as we saw under the purpose slide, the application of mathematical content learned sort of from K to 9 with a little bit in 10, and applied in various contexts. It entails stuff you learn in your science classes, social classes, and other areas, and it really is numeracy and not math. The specifications online that we've talked about before get into that a lot more, but we can certainly talk about that if you have any questions. I'd advise you to look at the numeracy specifications online, where we do address that topic a little more around how are numeracy and math different. What level of literacy is required? And this comes up because in the world of math exams, all the ones you know and love, your applications, workplace math, and all those good old grade 10 level math exams, there was not a lot of reading required. And so some folks have thought, what about our ELL populations, our offshore students, and that sort of area of learner that may have more issues around language? Want you to know that the numeracy assessments are developed by practicing teachers, including teachers who work with ELL students. They keep the language to an extremely low literacy level, far lower than would be expected for graduation in the province of BC. They use the least amount of language possible to set the scenario for those numeracy contexts and try to keep that to a lower level. So far, the data is indicating we're not seeing any issues with offshore students and ELL students in terms of their performance. When we pull out those students, we're seeing that they're performing. Generally, the offshore students, for example, perform better than the province of BC students as a whole. So again, the language doesn't appear to be an impediment to students doing well on numeracy, even those students who may not have the literacy skills that others have at the same level. In terms of post-secondaries and what they're going to require, I don't know if Nell, you wanted to say a little more about that piece. Sure. Of course, that's always a tough one to pin down because we don't control them.
Yeah, so sure, it's Nell Hodges here, and I'm the Director of Engagement on this file. So in terms of the post-secondary piece, just want to lay some context in terms of the Ministry, both of Education and Advanced Education Skills and Training, have been working with post-secondary institutions over the last number of years on this, and particularly supporting them as they go through their review and governance processes to ensure alignment with the changes in the K-12 sector, including the Graduation Numeracy Assessment. As Marcus has said, each post-secondary institution has the authority to determine their own admission requirements. That's within their realm of responsibility. Having said that, most of them that we know to date are not considering using the GNA for admissions at this time. You know, it's something that they're interested in, but not using it for admissions at this time.
Thanks, Nell. And it just popped into my head again. Kevin and I were talking before, and a question had come in around, and this does come up sometimes, so a good one to raise, Kevin, around what are the adaptations and sort of things for students who have different needs when it comes to writing this assessment. They're going to be similar to or the same as the adaptations we've always had for different exams in the past. That is, Braille versions are available. Large print for students who actually still need large print available in paper, but we're hoping because it's online, the vast majority are able to use the expanded font size and all the features within AWIS to do that. All of the things like using Google Read and Write and Kurzweil and all of those types of things are available online to allow students and provide those accommodations for those who need them to allow those students to write this as well. So all of those adaptations are available for this. We can talk more about that later if anyone has any questions. Around administration, June 2018, there were about 50,000 students that wrote. The student results are now available thanks to Linda Shop and the hard work they've done down there. Yay, we finally got them out despite little tracks glitches, as of course is going to happen when you've got new measures and new types of things to score. We've got them out now, and we'll show you what those student results are going to look like and what the students see and what school results will look like as they come on down the pipe later on. Again, performed very well, very comparable to January's first assessment that we had through the managed implementation. Statistically, the results were very similar. And of course, the next GNA session, November 5th to 7th, get ready, good times. Okay, GNA student reports. I'll turn it over to Linda so she can talk a little about what these student reports are looking like, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth, Linda, I guess, exactly, to talk about that.
Great, thanks very much, Marcus. So we're just gonna show you some quick slides as to what students would actually see when they log into our student transcript service. So you can see there on the screen that in order for the students to actually be able to see their GNA results, they would have to sign up, and that includes signing up for a BCID first, and then getting a password, and then they would be able to log in to the actual student transcript service. So we have a poster that we put out back in the spring and sent to the schools. We'll reissue that poster again, showing it's a one-pager, essentially for counselors to be able to provide to the students so that they can actually step through the process on how to be able to sign up for student transcripts. The next one, the slide shows the actual dashboard of the SDS system. So if you look here, the students are able to order transcripts and obviously look at their marks and also be able to change their information that they have in the system. So if you look on the right-hand side, what we've highlighted in the yellow box is where they would actually be able to access their assessment results. So they would click on that. and be able to go into a screen where you look on the far left-hand side. That's the initial screen that they would see that would pop up. And you can see here that we've, this mocked up screen is actually for the 2018 January session. And you can see there that it says Numeracy Assessment with a proficiency score of 3. Now, if they click on that, it's hard to see on the screen, but if you look at if you click on the Numeracy Assessment, it'll take you into the next slide, which is on the far right-hand side here, which is the actual report itself. So students will be able to have, I guess, more fulsome look at how they scored and what the actual meaning of the score is. And so Marcus will walk you through what the actual proficiency scale is and how to be able to decipher that.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Yeah, so just a bit of background. You can see on your screen right now, we have the numeracy proficiency scale that's written and addresses specifically this assessment and provides detailed content as to what students are able to do at each of those levels. In this case, I pulled it from a student who achieved a 3 of proficient, and you can see the language at the top of that. Student demonstrates a complete understanding of the concepts and competencies relevant to the expected learning. And that's the generic descriptor we use when it comes to reporting across the board. But underneath that, we've broken that down to talk about what a student can do in relation to this numeracy measure. These descriptors were written as part of standard setting by groups of practicing teachers from different subjects, mathematics included, but other subject areas as well, coming together and looking at lots and lots of student samples and establishing those cut scores, and then writing these descriptors based on their sort of intimate knowledge of working with what students are doing at the different levels. So these were written by practicing teachers to give that indication of what a student is able to do at each of the levels. You'll see, as Linda was showing you, this is the top of the student report that the student will see when they log in. In this case, it's Grace Lee, who is logged in and sees that she got proficient, and you can see the results. Says your results in the graduation numeracy assessment is a 3, proficient, with those descriptors I just talked about. Underneath that, it breaks it down by the different section within numeracy, the plan and design, the reasoned estimates, fair share, and modeling that you'll find in our numeracy specifications and that we talked about in the last webinar. And you can see how well a student did on the how well this student did, Grace Lee, did on the closed response items in each section. She happened to get 14 out of 24. These are just her raw scores. And you can see she may want to look at the modeling section where she only got, that's the 4th one down, where she got 2 out of 6. Maybe that's the area she wants to give some attention to, don't know. You can also see down below, it shows the extended written response questions. Those are the 2 that they answer on paper and how well they did on those. Those are scored out of 8. They're double marked on a 4-point rubric, centrally marked by practicing teachers. One thing I want to point out, and you can see a little yellow box where it says the score indicates how you performed on each task and is not directly convertible to your proficiency level. Please be aware this piece below is based on just raw score. Everything we do, whether it's on English 12 or on the numeracy, is IRT'd. We use item response theory to take all of these scores and mitigate the concerns statistically where one assessment might be more difficult than another, so that we put them on a level playing field. So you can't take these raw scores and convert them to a proficiency level. It therefore means when your students get the reports, you and I could have very similar raw scores, but be at a different proficiency level. And again, that's because you can't directly go from raw scores to proficiency level, because we IRT them to make sure. You might have had a harder assessment than me, and that's taken into account statistically. So just a caveat, if students talk about how come I got a different raw score than my friend who has or a different proficiency score than my friend who has a very similar raw score. Okay, the GNA school report, which is coming shortly. Linda's going to talk about that a little bit, and this may be of interest to your world.
Okay, great, thanks Marcus. So on the screen now, you guys will be very familiar with how you will log into the Your Secure School web, and obviously you sign in with your ID and password, and that'll take you into the next screen, which will show you the different school level reports that are available. Of course, we've got a draft here. The school level reports will be available by October 18th in the sense of being able to do the breakouts, but this information will contain the following information, which you can break down by province, district, and school. And the data will also be available in the CSV format by pens for those wishing to do further analysis. So some of that information is available now in regards to the CSV. We have that information. and you can actually click through the next screen to be able to see the different reports that you guys are familiar with and on what you can actually access. So what you would be looking for is the graduation assessment exam results for download, and you would click onto that. And the next screen would show you more information. So in this shot, we've actually selected the 2018-01 session, but you would actually, for your June results, would want to click onto the 2018-06 and then be able to click on the different reports based on what you're looking for in regards to results. So we've highlighted some there in the sense of what you would be able to look at. The CSV file format generally drops out in an Excel format, so you can be able to probably export and do some data mining with that if you need to, but essentially the results are there for students based on their pens, and then to be able to drop out to different information pending on the report.
Just want to comment that the reports that Linda's talking about, they provide all the information that you saw in those student reports in terms of by school, how you did compared to the district, compared to public, compared to the province as a whole, and they break it out by task type, those things we talked about, the fair share modeling, reasoned estimates, and so on. We've added some other categories that are going to be coming online, including the numeracy processes. If you want to break it down by interpret, apply, solve, and analyze, that's all discussed in the numeracy specifications, and by the DOK level, Webb's depth of knowledge, level 1, 2, 3. So using pen numbers, breaking it down by any of these types of categories to get into discussions of students that might be of interest to you, pulling out that demographic and breaking it down by any of those types of categories. So it adds additional information that students are not seeing on their report to the abilities for you to break it out by numeracy processes and cognitive level as well as task types. Okay, Janine is going to talk about the GNA next steps and the exciting things coming up.
Okay, well, we've posted the schedule for all the assessments and exams, and so that is part of the Handbook of Procedures. So on the slide deck here is a screenshot, and it's kind of highlighted where the assessment schedule is, so you can find out where the 2018-19 graduation assessment schedule is. Of course, as you know, it's going to be November 5th to 7th, but that's a really good place to bookmark for the schedule. And then we'll go on to the next one is talking about our admin guides. So we have two really fantastic GNA admin guides. We have one for onshore schools, and so that's the first one you see there that says May 2018. And then we have our offshore and Yukon edition as well. And there are some very different administrative things that have to be done for offshore and Yukon. So that's why they have their entire own separate guide. And so also we have a very fantastic GNA parent brochure, apparently available in 11 languages, and don't ask me to pronounce all of those. And so available in 11 languages, and it's a really, really useful thing for people to get a quick sense of what really the GNA is all about. And then the really important thing is we have this fantastic email, education.numeracyassessment@gov.bc.ca. And so all of those, we monitor this box daily, and any questions you have about the numeracy assessment can go into that box, and it will be sent along to the appropriate person, whether it be Marcus or myself or Linda, depending on what the nature of your question is. And so we're really here to support you and answer all your questions.
And thanks, Janine. We love your cards and letters, so keep them coming. And as I said, we now have a whole 9 minutes left, but we can certainly add a little more if people want, for any questions and answers that you might wish to have or ask. Kevin, I don't know if that's you that will orchestrate that, I think.
Yeah, I will do that. Hopefully everyone can hear me again. And so thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. And I encourage our participants with the time remaining, if you could put some more questions in the question box. I think your presentation was so comprehensive that I actually at this point don't have a lot of questions, but they may start trickling in right now. Thank you for the parent guide. It'll be interesting to take a look at that. And just related to one of the challenges, I think, for school and district leaders, particularly when we move to a numeric scale for assessment, what we often hear is they struggle a little bit with the math. So if a 3 is proficient and a 2 is doing very well, often parents see that as 2 out of 4 being 50%. So just curious about if that's outlined pretty clearly within the parent's guide in terms of the proficiency scale and what those different numbers actually mean.
No, it's a good question, Kevin. Sort of yes and no. It's discussed, but really it's pointing back to the language and asking them to read those descriptors, and then going to those student reports that we talked about, where a parent can really see what a student is able to do without using that deficit language, and what not in terms of what they're not able to do, but what they are able to do at those levels and what that means, and trying to steer them away from having 1, 2, 3, 4, emerging, developing, proficient, and extending be equal to, A, B, C, D, F kind of thing, right?
Exactly. So another question we have is, what is the standard that a student must achieve to be considered successful enough for graduation?
So there is no required standard in terms of a student must achieve a 3 or a 2 in order to graduate in the province of BC. We had long conversations about this, and one of the problems you get into is that it's a 2-hour paper and pencil measure. And if we get into saying this will be a gatekeeper to graduation, what do we do with those students who struggle to demonstrate their learning in this type of an environment, but are really able to do that within your classroom context, where they can show their learning in different ways because they are more astute at doing it in a different type of format? Not everyone exceeds on large scale assessments. And so not wanting this to be a gatekeeper that says you only got a 2, you don't graduate, but rather have it be a thing that shows on your transcripts as one of the indications of your learning and one of the indications of what you've gone through, and highlighting your performance. So there's a separate line item on every student's transcript that says Graduation Numeracy Assessment, and clearly lists your proficiency level. That we felt was the best way to represent student learning in this context without having it be a high stakes gatekeeper, but still make it be something that's there as one of many pieces of their learning that's represented, along with all of their classroom work and classroom courses, capstone projects, and other things students are going to do. Yeah. So the student's proficiency level is their best proficiency level they're able to indicate, and clearly labeled on their transcript.
Okay, thank you for that.
Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the clarification, and I think that answered the question for our participant. So another question, just more about the nuts and bolts piece. Can you speak specifically to sort of the grade level of the secondary student that they can do the test in 2018, 2019? So is that grade 10, 11, 12? All of those grades are eligible to write?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
I mean, again, Kevin, if students, you won't probably have anybody, but students who have already done one of the old graduation Math 10 exams wouldn't be doing this, but those students are quickly fading away. You may still have some. Okay.
Just a question that's sort of representative of the times in which we live. Just curious about developments in terms of security controls at the school level. That sort of was evident during previous online provincial exams. So can you talk a little bit about sort of security pieces?
You mean in terms of, I'm sitting beside Linda, who's much more astute at numeracy than I am, and I'm not able to copy off her kind of thing, and also just I happen to have taken, remembered what this is and told my other fellow students about it, that kind of thing, Kevin?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so a couple things are in place here. Because it's electronic and there's no paper versions, that's a huge savings piece for us in terms of not just dollars and cents, but security, of course, because as soon as you have paper out there, you've got a hard copy tangible thing floating around. So that's one piece. The other thing to note is that we are running multiple forms during every administration. So when I sit down next to Linda to write this numeracy assessment, I'm randomly given a form, and she's randomly given a form, and we're unlikely to have the same numeracy assessment. So I'm not able to look at hers. Well, I can, but I won't be doing so well because she's got one on pit houses and I've got one on forest fires, and we're not having the same assessment, which is back to the earlier comment we made around raw scores not converting directly into proficiency levels. Because we're running multiple forms, they're all a little different. The teachers try to build them to all be about at the same level and be fair, but we statistically make sure that through IRT, item response theory, that those forms are comparable and on the same playing field when our results are added up to produce those proficiency scores.
Okay, related to that, thank you, Marcus. So two-part question. For special ed students, is there a paper copy? Sometimes we'll have a number of our struggling learners who will do better on a paper copy as opposed to answering online. And the follow-up question to that, how many opportunities do students have to rewrite the assessment, and which assessment actually counts?
I'll answer the second question first and then get back to the paper version. Students they do their initial write and they have 2 additional attempts. So a total of 3 attempts. And I want to clarify, and I know we talked about this at the last webinar, at least I think we did. There's a difference between an attempt and completed. Students must complete this assessment to graduate, not just attempt it. If you walk in, put your name on it and leave, that's one of your 3 attempts. That is not considered completed. Students must complete enough of the assessment that we can establish a proficiency level for that student in order to graduate. That means please let your students know going in, putting your name on, leaving, that's a loss of one of your 3 attempts, but it doesn't count as completed. You have 2 more attempts now to complete, to be clear on that piece. The paper version, the short answer is no. These are designed to be electronic, and most of the items don't function very well on paper. That said, for those special and very rare students who need paper because they have a need for that's specifically outlined in their IEP and they're not able to function on a computer, we are producing some very limited and small things like large print on paper for those students with visual disabilities or that cannot work on a computer. But the short answer is there is no paper available for students except those very rare cases where it's an actual requirement. A preference does not constitute a requirement.
Yeah, I think we have like 2 out of 50,000.
There you go. There was 2 out of 50,000, and it's because it's actually a physical need due to visual abilities and so on. And of course, Braille still provided.
Okay, so we have a growing number of students who are opting for distributed learning options for their schooling. So if they write the numeracy assessment, can they write that at home, or do they have to go into their school or a closest school to write the numeracy assessment?
Yes, they would have to they'd have to write it with the school. So they would register with their closest school as a late registrant, or what we used to call a walk-in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all outlined in our administration guide too.
Okay. Do schools have some flexibility in terms of who writes this year? Could they decide to just open it up to grade 11 and 12 students, or is it intended that all grade through 10 through 12 students have the opportunity to write provincially?
That's going to be a school level decision. Of course, the ministry is never going to mandate to say you must, because we fully understand that there are certain contexts where, for whatever particular reason that we have no knowledge of, it's actually really important for you to get your grade 11s through this year. You don't have the capacity even over the 5-day window. I don't know. I'm imagining multiple scenarios, but the idea is that it is open to all students, but understanding there are certainly local conditions that might negate that being a possibility and might need you to make decisions around how to handle that and manage that.
So, school leaders out there are always about details. So those are the types of questions that I'm seeing right now. Assuming that if they make multiple attempts, their highest score would be the one that would be recorded?
Absolutely, correct.
Another somewhat related question, let's say, for example, and this does happen in secondary, so the student completes half of the exam and walks out. I know this is potentially just a one-off, but were to do perfectly on that half of that exam, does that score as high in terms of its proficiency, even though they didn't complete the exam?
No, if they did half of the items and they got all correct, they would get half correct, and they would probably not get a very high proficiency score.
Mm-hmm. And do the students have the option to do all 3 attempts in 1 year if they choose to?
They do. They can do any of that. They just can't do more than 1 attempt per session. So let's say in June, you can't write it on the first day of the June session, then write it on the 3rd day of the June session, but you can certainly write it in November or in January.
Okay. Just a consideration. So one of the things I have heard from secondary principals, if you're in a large secondary school and you open it up for all of their students to write if they're interested, but you don't have enough computers for all of your students. So is it accessible through tablets and those sorts of things? You don't necessarily need to be on a desktop computer to write it?
Yes, absolutely. Again, as outlined in the administration guide, there's instructions on how to do it on Chromebooks, tablets, all those kind of things.
Okay. And so,
sorry, Kevin, one thing I would suggest though is try it out before, because again, you know, while it's been functioning, it's been tested and seems to be working, you really want to know that you've got everything set up and working properly if you're using tablets or Chromebooks. Just give it a try and make sure it's working so you don't get surprises on the day when students are logged in to write.
right. And so can you just clarify, so after the students go through a writing session, that window is opened, how quickly following that do schools have access to the results? And I think that's, you know, that's a formative assessment question. So if students write early in the year, the school notices that in one particular theme within an assessment, the kids aren't doing particularly well. Well, they want to target a potential deficiency for those kids who are interested in rewriting perhaps later in the year.
A really good question, Kevin. I think, of course, the one thing that takes a bit of time is we're centrally marking those two problem-solving tasks that kids select, those personal choice ones they make out of the four, the two they pick. So that takes a bit of time to get, you know, the dozens, hundreds of teachers together to score 50,000 of these. Well, in this case, it's 100,000 because each student did two, and those all need to be scored, fed into the system. Trax needs to manipulate it. We need to run IRT and spit that back out. So it does take us several weeks to get the data back out. I'll say by several weeks, I'll say it's probably taking us a month-ish or so, maybe a bit more. We'll sort this out over time. We'll turn them around as quickly as possible, but it's the central marking, which was considered a very desirable thing to do, to actually score these in a standardized way through trained and credentialed teachers, but that adds the time. So we'll turn the results around as quickly as we can, and certainly within a few months, being able to have those out for you to look at.
Okay. Next question. Of course, this is something for schools to wrestle with, but interested in your feedback. So, you know, in a semesterized school, you'll have kids writing who are not currently taking a math course. So, any suggestions on what the ministry expectations are in terms of prepping kids for that assessment when they're not currently enrolled in a math course?
Well, it's not a math exam, so that's okay. I would take a look at the specifications. I would take a look at the 5 videos that are online intended for students to prep for this. It walks through all of the different numeracy processes and has a student on a video narrate how to handle those processes. In the specifications, it talks about the types of math content that are applied in numeracy, and they really are K to 9. Take a look at that. Being in a math course is not at all a prerequisite or a requirement, or necessarily even going to help with this in any way. It is numeracy and built on K to 9 learning across curricula. With a titch from 10, you'll see it in the specifications.
Okay. One of the challenges when FSA moved to the online format is that kids would, you know, complete a good percentage of the online FSA assessment, then some, for whatever reason, if they're on Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi drops and they log it back in again and they end up starting from scratch. So I'm hoping that came up as an issue in sort of trialing the numeracy assessment. But if kids were to get kicked out during you know, in the middle of the exam, when they log back in, will it pick them up from where they left off?
Yes, from what we've heard, nobody lost anything. There was a couple instances when that did happen, and everything was still, the vendor was still able to have everything intact, and they just kind of picked up where they left off. So nobody lost everything and had to start from scratch again.
Yeah, so of course school leaders do everything they can to make sure that students are on a dogwood track, but is there an expectation that students in sort of on the evergreen pathway are expected to write as well?
Okay, it's Janine, I'll answer this. Since the evergreen is not a graduation credential, and this is a graduation requirement, there's not an expectation that a student on the evergreen would be expected to write. If they may choose to, of course they can, but it's not an expectation because they're not on a graduation credential.
Just a question for me. So last year at one of our chapter council meetings early on, the ministry had come and presented, you know, their very comprehensive student data site, EdUdata, if I recall correctly. Anyways, it was really interesting for school leaders to be able to drill down district by district, school by school in terms of how their kids are doing on numerous assessments. And of course, as an organization, we were very supportive of that. So will these results at the district level be accessible through that site as well?
No, we're not using that's EduData out of UBC, which we were using to do the types of things we're now producing through the things we're talking about today, the student reports and those school reports, those CSV files and all of that information. So no longer with EduData, but we'll be doing the types of reports that you saw today, which allow all of that and more to slice and dice the data.
Okay, good. So that is bringing us to the end of our webinar. I really appreciate that we were able to have some time to answer some questions. We didn't get to all of those questions, and so what I will do is I'm going to put those questions together, and I will send them to our presenters and give them an opportunity to respond to those questions as well. So with that, I am going to bring our webinar to a close, but perhaps for our presenters, just give you an opportunity for any final comments.
Anything, Maria? Well, I thank you all for participating, joining in, and really hope that you enjoy the remaining few days of what is summer and the long weekend coming up.